men from a very young age, it's instilled in us that we need to be the stereotypical bread maker, head of the household. We need to show no emotion and just internalize our problems, and that just keeps things bottled up, and that is just not healthy from all of us. And then because it's been like that for decades, centuries even, that just needs to change. And there needs to be aside from policy, there needs to be just increased visibility and access to resources to help men.
Hello, everyone. How are you all today?
Okay, how are you doing?
Doing good.
Okay.
It's good to see you back, Terrence. You've been here before. We're glad to have you back. And I would like to welcome Gerald as well as Enrique. Welcome to the Mission and the Mandate.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
So we're here today to talk about male participation in the workforce. And so, our motto here at the Mission and Mandate is that we're taking the voice of the community to the field. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking about policymakers, we're talking about legislators, mm-hmm. we're talking about decision makers. Mm-hmm. And so we want to be able to carry that voice back. Today I wanted to talk to you all. Mm-hmm. We are all at various points in our careers. We've been in the labor force for a number of years. Mm-hmm. Some of us, we've been there longer than others. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But recently there was an article in USA Today that talked about male participation mm-hmm. in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And they tried to talk about it from the standpoint of, mm-hmm. these high interest rates that we're getting from the Federal Reserve Bank. Mm-hmm. They're saying that basically the male participation has been on decline for such a long time that at this point we're having a shortage of American workers. Mm. And so anytime that the supply is limited, mm-hmm. then, it causes demand mm-hmm. to be much higher. Yeah. Yeah. And so I just wanted they are saying that men are leaving the workforce, mm-hmm. and they have been for decades. Mm-hmm. And some people have some ideas around what that is. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to just hear from you all, hear a little bit about your mm-hmm. journey in the world of work, mm-hmm. and any explanation that you believe could mm-hmm. make a man want to leave the workforce. Mm-hmm. So we can start with you, Terrence, if you like.
Well, to me, it's a multitude of factors. Sometimes it can be mental health issues that persist from jobs, or it can be a situation where people have been working for years, they have no mobility in their position, or they feel like they're stagnated to a certain industry where they feel like there's no other out for them. So they'll just stick with that industry, get tired of it, and now they want to try something else. So they quit, leave the workforce. There's economical barriers. Sometimes they may not be able to afford college. College has rose since the past 30 years. Yep. Inflation, just rising costs and everything. So it's not just one situation. It just depends on that person. Since, for instance, there's a cultural shift in America as far as men go. There are less men joining the military. There are less men working construction, working certain industries. So it's just not one.
Thank you for your response, Terrence. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you said mm-hmm. what you said about college being unaffordable, mm-hmm. because one of the things they discussed in this article in USA Today was the fact that mm-hmm. males who actually obtain a college degree, mm-hmm. they end up staying employed longer. Mm-hmm. And they have, I guess this is back to the statement you made about mobility, like you're reaching mm-hmm. a certain point where there's no more upward mobility for you. Mm-hmm. So I would like to invite the rest of the panel to weigh in on any additional thoughts that you may have mm-hmm. Regarding male participation in the labor force.
No, definitely. I totally concur with everything that Terrence explained. As a man of color, in particular, I'll never forget, I'm 51, so I was born in the 1900s. And I'll never forget, going to college in the 1990s. And the biggest joke was that, hey, we're outnumbered, as male. We're outnumbered. I went to Florida A&M University. And I'll never forget that, as far as we knew, we were outnumbered, 1 to 7. I don't think the number was quite that high, but we came to understand that those numbers were very similar at many other schools, around the country, and we were blown away about it. And at the time, we joked about it. We thought it was funny that, everybody would have 7 girlfriends and all this.
Yeah.
And we did not think about the impact that it would have on the community and on the family structure.
Yeah.
And now today, we see, a lot of professional, women of color, are in a situation where they feel that they can't find their professional equals.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this play out. And it's very strange because I happen to be in a conversation with my father, who's also college educated. And it never occurred to me, and we happen to be talking about this topic, and he mentioned that when he went to college, it was the same thing. And it blew my mind. I said, this has been going on longer than I had any idea.
Yeah.
So in my professional career, whether it be K-12, university, faculty, I worked at Hopkins Hospital as well. I worked in government contracting. Usually I have been, the unicorn. Very few of us have been there, Every once in a while, I might have one other person that looked like me that was a male. But for the most part, usually I'm walking through the door alone, Yeah.
No, I do want to bring that up because you're saying your father was college educated.
Yeah.
Okay. My father was not. My mother was.
Okay.
Okay. And so, and I was thinking as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about the neighborhood I grew up in. And I was thinking about, very small neighborhood, so we knew everyone. And in many of the houses, like the wife may be a nurse or a teacher, but the husbands were like laborers.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking one of the things they were talking about, this decline of male participation in the workforce, is that there are a number of jobs that have been offshored in terms of manufacturing.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of structure, right? Like there could be a desire. Mobility is probably now limited with the offshoring of jobs. But I wanted to read this statistic. It says from 1980 to 2019, non-college educated men's median weekly earnings fell 17% after adjusting for inflation, while pay for college educated counterparts increased by 20%.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Now, definitely, it's interesting you bring up about, in your community, the work that the men did. I'll never forget, we looked at, the trends that happened over in Baltimore. And, it used to be that, back in the 60s and before that, a lot of factories were there. And you could have a middle income job. You could be middle class and pass the job down. Your son come into the factories and so forth. People did well. And when you mentioned the offshoring and the outsourcing that did happen, all those factories closed. They had Bethlehem Steel. They had fabric manufacturing. They had a sugar factory over there. And I'm just speaking about Baltimore.
Yeah, and don't forget Detroit and the Big Three.
Same thing with it. Yeah. And when all those factories closed, I remember hearing, talk about people committing suicide, when those factories closed down, because nobody had a backup plan at all.
Yeah.
They figured, without a college education, they were still able to have a middle class lifestyle. And I just thought that was very interesting that, because I assumed that it was just drugs that drove everything down, but industry, played a big role in that.
So with that, I want to go to Enrique on this. You're Latino, all right, born in America to immigrant parents. What's that experience like for men in your upbringing?
Well, to me, the upbringing was of a very similar situation where, because of the traditional conservative, very religious, very Catholic background, where the men provide. The men provide jobs in a whole sorts of areas, and the wife, the mother, stays at the home, has dinner on the table at 6 o'clock. So I grew up in that household as well, where my father cleaned office buildings and houses for a living. My mother was, up until very recently, a housewife. She stayed at home, took care of me and my brother when we were growing up, and then had food on the table. And then up until recently, she became a nanny. So it's just those very traditional roles that I grew up with as well. And similar background to that I would like to point out of a childhood friend that brought up a memory as well, and to Gerald's example as well, that a friend worked at a paper mill in Virginia, for a newspaper company, and around 2002 till 2003, the paper mill shut down, and that meant that he was not fired or anything. He was let go because the paper mill closed down. He had no plan B as well. Lost his job, he lost his insurance benefits, and then shortly after got cancer. Got cancer, and then because he didn't have a work-sponsored insurance anymore, he couldn't pay for his treatment, so he had to take out private loans to pay for his treatment, and then fell into debt and had to declare bankruptcy. So it's just those type of experiences where the labor market it was so focused on men having those jobs that relate to labor. Hard labor that's just where men were, and there was no consideration, or not much consideration, when it came to shifting or retraining men to go into different areas with emerging tech, with emerging services and other industries that moved away from labor. So that is exactly what came to mind when of men in the workforce.
Yeah. Thank you all for that. I wanted to bring this topic to us because even in the work that I do, like in education, it was largely like female dominated, right? Especially I was an elementary school teacher. So there were a lot of times where I was like the only male, right? And then also I think now that I do work in the workforce development space, a lot of times, even in our recruitment, we recruit more women than men. And the Boston Fed, in that article, they talked about what they believed, and I want to read it for clarity's sake. When they talk about the incomes being lower for non-college educated men than college educated men, like not increasing, the Boston Fed said, quote unquote, this finding suggests that deteriorating social status is a plausible key factor. Then it goes on to say, basically, in other words, that lower self-esteem is associated with lower social status. And that has caused some men to simply drop out rather than cope with stress. And so in this day and age, we know people are also doing a lot of gig work, and people are finding ways to make ends meet that maybe perhaps to them gives them the opportunity to be a little bit respected at higher levels. Perhaps it allows them to take ownership in their work, and that they feel like they're doing stuff they really want to do versus working in a place that gives them endpoint. But I want us to talk about this because I know I'm a fraternity guy. I'm a minister. I play a lot of roles that, involve a lot of males. I'm a brother. I'm an uncle. I'm a friend. My mom's a widow, so we are taking care of her, like we're supposed to. But I want to kind of, in your experience, how is this mobility, this not having mobility or making, wages that are not enough, right? How do you all think this, like, we talk to guys, does this come up in our conversations at all? In the barbershops or?
Yeah, I mean, I hear it a lot, when it comes to marriage. I think that is on a huge decline, unfortunately. And I think the more that we have a decline of the actual family unit, that contributes to a lot of other trouble that we're having. It seemed like there was a push to get more, women of color in STEM, and it worked. It worked, and it's beautiful. I'm very proud of that. Women of color are, in particular, my understanding is the statistic is that, black women are the most educated. I don't know what the exact numbers are, with that, but there was an initiative that was put forward, and it worked. And I think that, men of color, we got caught up in the fact that this was already, a matriarchal, patriarchal society, and it was assumed that we were a part of that, so we did not, get moved. There was no initiative to make sure that we were, put into those same, fields. And I think that's a misconception that, this is a male-dominated society. So that meant that we were already in these spaces. But, when those factories closed, we did not make that adjustment. That adjustment wasn't made,
Just to give you some numbers, I'm looking at a statistic here from Brookings Institute, and it says the male college crisis is not enrollment, but completion. And it goes on to say that over 1.1 million women received a bachelor's degree in 2018-19 school year, compared to fewer than 860,000 men. So you're talking about almost 300,000 more per year. So they're saying about 74 men receive a bachelor's degree for every 100 women.
What degrees are they going after?
Bachelor's.
I'm talking about like what in particular, like what's.
Oh, what fields?
Subjects.
Yeah. Certainly, we know. I think what Gerald was saying was STEM. Like, I don't think anything has slowed down there. I think we've seen representation increase in those areas. Any science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I think we've seen some declines though in other fields. Like historically, education has been a field where women and have gone, or people of color. But we know that there are shortages nowadays. But the biggest thing here is that I don't want it to go unnoticed. And when I look at a lot of the people I work with, it's very difficult to recruit a man into some of our workforce programming. It just is. And then when I think about like talking with employers a lot of times, I'm not talking to, a lot of male hiring managers unless we're in the construction trades or something like that. But I wanted to just put this concept out here because I guess I really never thought about like male participation in the workforce I never thought about it being linked to like the interest rates. And what this article, how it started, was that it wanted 2.7 million men to come back to work. And this is coming from the Fed Chair Powell. So with that, I think I want to, like, what can we say? Like, what can we say to people to reverse this? So one of the things I shared earlier was that for decades, male involvement across the board has been down in the labor force. And, of course, people are taking care of themselves. We don't necessarily know how because it's not in areas that is regulated heavily. Going to a job every day, you're paying taxes, you're paying, so all that. But if I'm a gig worker or, whatever, I may not report. So what can we tell people? Like, how should we get more of our brothers and friends and fraternity brothers and, community members to jump back into the labor force? Like, what might be helpful? What can we tell some people?
Well, I know a big factor that's not really talked about, especially in DC. Okay, drugs, some drugs are legal here, marijuana, but there are a lot of jobs that require you to pass a drug test. That is a simple but huge factor. Like, there are a lot of jobs in DC that require simply just pass a drug test, and they can't pass that.
Okay.
So you have a lot of men that can't get a job based off of that. It's little small stuff like that. We can say, hey, you need to lay off of that.
Yeah.
Look at the bigger picture. Let's get you in the job market.
Okay.
We have to change the stereotype and change the energy of the culture. In order
And this is back to like giving out the right information, because not only in the District of Columbia, but in other cities, they have not legalized marijuana, they've decriminalized it.
Yeah, decriminalized.
And so simply that means if you have a certain amount, you can't be charged for, a small amount. So they've decriminalized it. They have not legalized it. So if you have more than that, whatever that small amount is, you can be charged. Right? Number two, it's employers have not said you can use those recreational drugs, use those drugs recreationally, and still have a job. Because if you're driving a train, who wants someone who could potentially be, intoxicated doing that? And so it's outreach and it's education. Now there's some structural challenges here because you're making it okay, but it's really not okay. So then there has to be some other, legislation or policies or supports for this.
Yeah, the other issue, just to piggyback on that, around, because we had a whole entire war on drugs, that targeted, the Black and Latino community very heavily. The prison industrial complex is very profitable, and it's been that way. And that took a large number of people out of the workforce, because even after they paid their debt to society, after they were clearly targeted in many cases, they still got a life sentence, because when they came out, many people have a felony, and that follows them. Unfortunately, I think something should be done, especially in the light of the fact that they have moved to decriminalize it. I think that many of the records, depending on what that charge was, nonviolent offenders, there needs to be something put in place, to correct that, to repair that, because you have a large number of men that were taken out of the workforce because of that, or there's a huge ceiling, as far as what they can do. So many of them didn't, attempt after they did reenter, society, to go and get different degrees because they felt like, I have a felony. They felt like it was null and void, unfortunately. But, I do know people who did get degrees after they did, had been incarcerated, and they were able to do well. But they're few and far between, unfortunately.
No, that's important, because sometimes we'll look at a story and we'll try to present it as the story. And so it is important to understand, like, there are some islands of success here, but how can we translate that into something that, will be lasting and impactful?
Yeah. I definitely think that, from a policy standpoint, that needs to be addressed. I know a young man that made a mistake. He had a degree, got his degree in 4 years, and he made a mistake and ended up, being incarcerated. Brilliant. But he came out, and he had to become an entrepreneur, because even though he had the degree, nobody would hire him. So luckily he was able to still make a living, for himself as an entrepreneur. But again, those particular stories are few and far between. Yeah.
And also, just on a final note, because we did toss around a lot of statistics, a lot of personal stories, but also as well stories from friends, family, and people that we know, that there is also a whole other list of factors that we just haven't touched on at all. And it's just a multi-dimensional, comprehensive issue that just needs to be tackled and can't really be summed up like this. There are entire 200, 500-page reports out there from government to private entities to research institutions, and I do appreciate Cedric bringing up the Brookings Institute because I do follow them, and they are a very reputable source. But it's just that one final angle that I would like to include here is just mental health as well, because men from a very young age it's instilled in us that we need to be the stereotypical bread maker, head of the household. We need to show no emotion and just internalize our problems, and that just keeps things bottled up, and that is just not healthy from all of us. And then because it's been like that for decades, centuries even, that just needs to change. And there needs to be aside from policy, there needs to be just increased visibility and access to resources to help men, especially men across all work fields, to be able to have access to actually open up about their problems, because they might not be something that one moment in their lives and then just changed how they view life, how they view other people, or how they address problems in their careers. So we could keep talking about more, but it's just that just access to mental health and services and resources that exist out there. Men in general just don't know about these types of resources, and it's important for men to have access to these resources and make it plain for them that they just aren't alone anymore. You don't have to be that stoic personality. You can, but it's just that's not for everyone.
Yeah. No, very good point. We've heard a number of things here today, and certainly they're all valid points. Like as I said, I have brothers. I have a brother-in-law. And our how we participate in the labor market is very different. And just in a personal space here, like my brother-in-law has been on his job for maybe 30 or 35 years. That's a labor job. He's not college educated. He wouldn't mind me saying this. But I was probably making more money my first year of work than he was making. And at that time, he had probably been on his job like 15 years. And that is very different. It's back to the Detroit example, the Baltimore example, where the factory workers were making really good money and able to provide for their family. And I don't want to, come across anyway, but these are just men talking. And they could be proud as a provider for their family. And, this article that I read from USA Today, it talks about social status. And it doesn't go into that kind of detail, but it does talk about mental wellness and how do you cope when, you maybe feel less than a man. Okay? How do you cope with that? And so suicide, drugs, alcohol, violence. And that's not, Cedric 101. That's just history and data. But I do think we have to start thinking about some of this, and we have to be intentional about it. Like, we have to also begin to think, well, how do we recruit more? How do we, update our methods of bringing brothers into the fold? How do we, or our brothers, regardless of race or ethnicity, how do we get them connected to the services and supports? How do we get them in the face of employers? And also, we had some other panels before where, we talked about how do you remove the barriers to really bring people into this inclusive economy. Thank you all for coming out today. It's very good to see you again, Terrence. Enrique, you've been here before. Thank you so much for coming. This is the mission and the mandate. Our mission is really to look at how to get more males in their prime age of 25 to 54 connected with the labor force in ways that will allow them to have a good career and to earn a great wage. If our mission is going to be to connect males in their prime age of 25 to 54 with good careers that they can be proud of, then there is a mandate that must follow. There is a call of action. One of them is, we have to make sure that with new laws that are being passed to protect the rights and the futures of men, that we also at the same time develop the outreach and awareness campaigns. So we've talked about the example of most cities that have decriminalized marijuana. Well, that's fine if you have a very small portion, but employers are not at the point where they're allowing you to do that, and it's probably for safety purposes. And so there's this constant debate around decriminalized versus legal. Marijuana is not legal, it's decriminalized. So we've got to, as we try to advance one agenda, we've got to make sure that the outreach and awareness is there. And then the other piece that I've heard, and I've heard this come up over and over, and it's really what keeps me up at night, is that we have got to start thinking about accessibility. Inclusive accessibility is what I'm going to start calling it, because inclusive accessibility says we're looking to say that every person, no matter the background they're coming from, has an opportunity to access this job or this career or this training program or this neighborhood or this healthcare system. So I'm signing off with this call to action that we've got to make sure we're doing the right kind of awareness and outreach as laws adjust and change that impact men. And then secondly, we've got to look at making sure our accessibility is fully inclusive. This is Cedric Thompson, the workforce evangelist, coming to you with the mission and the mandate. Stay tuned for the next session.